Over the recent weeks, we've been telling you a lot about just two Duke basketball players who have made the decision to come back for one more season. At least we'll have Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster return for another year of basketball in Durham. Maybe more than just 1 year are ahead of those two guys. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we got to review the year that was for both of those players. It's an end-of-season review here on Locked On Blue Devils.
Hi, everybody. Dick Vitale. Hey, make sure you listen, man, to Locked On Blue Devils with J.J. Jackson. He's awesome, baby.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson. It's so great to have you here with us on Thursday, May 23rd, 2024. Locked On Blue Devils is your daily podcast devoted to everything going on in the life of Duke athletics. This time of year, we're doing our end-of-season reviews for Duke men's basketball before we officially turn the page into next year with the new guys coming on campus and so much more. Excited to talk about Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster due up on today's show with our good pal Kevin Connelly, who's the site expert from Ball Durham. If you have not done so already, please be sure to follow and subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils for free, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating and written review. Check us out on X at @LO_Blue Devils. Follow me there as well at _JJ_Jackson_. And then finally, make sure you watch the show on YouTube each and every day. Hit that like button on these videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and so much more. We really appreciate all of your support here within the Locked On Blue Devils world. So without further ado, I'm really excited to bring him on into today's show. Here he is, Kevin Connelly, back with us once again. How are you, sir?
I'm good, JJ. How are you?
Very well. Thank you for asking, man. Look, we've talked a lot about the offseason so far for this Duke basketball team with players that need to make their decisions regarding next season, whether or not they want to declare for the draft or possibly return to Duke for another season, enter the transfer portal. A couple of guys ran out of eligibility. So we've got a lot to discuss before we can fully turn the page into the new year. But today we'll talk a little bit about Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster, who played their sophomore season and freshman season, respectively, for those two guys there. So always fun to kind of look back at the year that just was, Kevin, with these two guys in particular.
Yeah, they were big parts of last year's team. They're going to presumably be bigger parts of next year's team. And they're the only two guys that are coming back for another season. So obviously the light is going to shine bright on them throughout the summer. I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about them as we get some more videos coming out of off-season workouts and off-season runs and 3-on-3, 4-on-4, 5-on-5. And those two, along with Cooper Flagg, I feel like will be the big three that everyone talks about from those videos. So good to put a bow on their season from last year, but I think a lot of people are going to want to look ahead to see what they're going to do with this upcoming team and this upcoming season.
Yeah, no doubt. These two likely could be your captain candidates for the Duke basketball team going into next season, given, again, that they're the only two players returning from last year's squad when we were waiting those big decisions to be made. So, Kevin, as we take a look at Tyrese Proctor, we go back to this time a year ago. The decision is made for Proctor to come back for his sophomore season. ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski was one of the first to break the news that Proctor would be returning for one more year and set to come back as a projected lottery pick type prospect in the 2024-2020 in this draft that we've got coming up here shortly. When we go back to this time a year ago, what do you remember thinking just simply about the fact that Proctor was coming back for another year?
Well, I think it was just that Duke was going to get back a big-time ball handler. You were hoping that his three-point percentages were going to rise and that he could be a lottery pick for this upcoming draft. Now, that really didn't all materialize. He did end up shooting 35% from three-point range, but I think the biggest thing that comes to your mind is the injuries. Obviously, the ankle injury that happened in the opening minute of their loss against Georgia Tech, which was in early December. and then the concussion that I believe happened in Cameron. That also happened against Georgia Tech. It might have.
So, yeah.
That sidelined him for a couple of games. And then you see the 32 games played, but only 25 of them were started, 10.5 points per game. And I think the one thing that a lot of people talked about is like, okay, how was the dynamic going to work between Tyrese Proctor and Jeremy Roach? And going into the season, we thought it was figured out because last year, what seemed to turn Duke's season during Proctor's freshman year was he became the primary ball handler and Jeremy Roach moved to almost a shooting guard role. And that was the expectation of what it was going to be coming into this season. And for the most part, when those two were on the floor, that is what it was. Now, yes, Duke had 2, sometimes even 3 guys that could generate offense with the ball in their hands. If you want to throw Jared McCain in there as well. But I don't want to say, obviously, he didn't live up or exceed a lot of the expectations that were placed on his shoulders in the beginning of the season. But I think it was a fine year for him. I think some would have liked to see the assist numbers a little bit higher, greater than 4 per game. I think some people expected the scoring number probably to be a little bit higher, more than just 10 per game. So, yeah, I think that's kind of where a good jumping off point is discussing Tyrese Proctor's season.
Yeah, again, the 32 games played, to your point, one of those games is like, what, a minute of the Georgia Tech game there in Atlanta. So, really, this is 31 games that we had Tyrese Proctor in full action and ready to go, and was kind of battling injuries for the first time in his life, as he discussed after the season. Really didn't have to deal with that many injuries growing up in his basketball career, which I can imagine can be tough for any basketball player as they're trying to get adjusted to the college game one. And then, okay, how do I be tough, fight through these injuries and still get the most out of what I'm trying to do? Led the team with 3.7 assists on the season. But Kevin, to your point, leading the team with under 4 assists, like, I don't know, just in a lot of ways, you might have thought that number would have been higher.
Yeah, and now again, Jeremy Roach got his assists. Duke was an unselfish team offensively once they found out what they wanted to do on offense. But with guys like Kyle Filipowski and obviously Jeremy Roach, Jared McCain, even put Mark Mitchell in that category for some consideration with pick and rolls that we really didn't see a lot of. Obviously, Mark Mitchell had his own offensive struggles. But yeah, I think a lot of people, if you said 3.5 assists or even 3.7 assists per game, you go back to this time last year for Tyrese Proctor, I think a lot of people would have taken the over on that. So yeah, that's just where I land right now on the assists. And I also think you look at his season, and a lot of people are going to remember the goose egg against NC State in the Elite Eight, where he missed all of his shots, played about 30 minutes, and was really almost a net negative out there on the floor when you're going to put up a performance like that, when you're one game away from the Final Four and your point guard gives you nothing in terms of points, when you're begging anybody to try and help out Jared McCain offensively. I think that's going to float in the minds of a lot of fans this offseason. And I think that's going to be something that Tyrese Proctor honestly has to answer for going into next year. And the only way he could do so is with his play on the court when November rolls around.
Kevin, as you said a little bit ago with Tyrese Proctor and the play that he had this season, he did improve that 3-point number just a little bit, 32% as a freshman, 35% shooting from 3-point range this year as a sophomore. We've talked about it a good bit throughout the course of the season, and certainly in these last few weeks as the season has come to a close. Proctor just did not attempt transition twos, which I think is something that a lot of people want to see improve moving forward. But really surprisingly, the free throw numbers, and we're not pointing out the lack of attempts because that is something that really needs to go up. But he took quite a dip in terms of just free throw percentage and what he was making there from the charity stripe.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at his freshman season, he was 61 of 70 from the free throw line. That's about 87%. And you have it on your screen. He was 75% this past season, but he only attempted 49. And for a point guard with the height and the size of Tyrese Proctor, it's surprising that he didn't get downhill more often to the rim. Now, was he afraid of contact later in the season? Obviously, the ankle injury in December and then the concussion, which was mid-February. So You wonder, was that a reason why he wasn't aggressive? Because like I said, with players like Kyle Filipowski and Mark Mitchell, it felt like some ball screens would be easy offense for him to run. Filipowski comes up, sets a ball screen, you drive to the basket. Same thing with Mitchell. Now, teams probably really didn't respect those two players' three-point shooting if it was a pick and pop, and Proctor just takes it to the hole, so he's easily double-teamed there. But you're right. I was going to bring this up before we wrapped up the conversation on Tyrese Proctor. He has to do a better job at getting to the free throw line. And that's one of the reasons why you look at the NC State game in the Elite Eight, these great guards in the NCAA tournament, the teams that win, when their team needs a bucket, not only can the point guard deliver them a bucket, they can get to the free throw line, give everybody a breather, knock down 2 free throws, see 2 shots go through the net, and try and get their rhythm that way. We didn't see that very much at all, if any, of Tyrese Proctor this season, and that has to change going into his junior year.
Yeah, we're going to get into that junior year specifically. We're also going to get into Caleb Foster and the year that he had as a freshman for the Duke basketball team. But before our first time out, to wrap up the Tyrese Proctor conversation, if you were tasked with delivering a defensive report card for Proctor and what he did this year for the Blue Devils, what would that look like?
I think for the most part, it's good. I think it's anywhere between like that B+ to A- range. Yes, there were a couple hiccups, but the defense for Tyrese Proctor as a freshman was greatly improved once he got used to the speed of the game. It continued to improve as a sophomore, and I expect it to go up a little bit more of a notch as a junior. So I think as a grade, he would get anywhere from a B+ to an A- in his defensive scouting report this past year.
Caleb Foster, another backcourt member for the Duke basketball team in 2023-2024. We review his season that was after we take our first time out here today. Locked On Blue Devils is brought to you by our friends over at Yahoo Finance. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data that you need in one place. They are the #1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycles, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com, a proud sponsor of Locked On Blue Devils. We'll keep the show rolling here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. I'm JJ Jackson, joined today by my good friend Kevin Connelly, who's the site expert for Ball Durham. And Kevin, now we turn our attention to the freshman this past year in the backcourt, Caleb Foster, and the year that he had for the Duke Blue Devils. As we throw his stats up on the screen for those watching us on YouTube, clearly the first thing that jumps out, 27 games played of the 36 possible games to be played for Caleb Foster. His season was cut short due to injury.
Against Wake Forest back in late February, and that was really a killer for Duke. Obviously, it shortens the rotation, and it gives you a guy that has the ability to score the basketball. And everyone was introduced to Caleb Foster going back to the Michigan State game of the Champions Classic when his second half sparked Duke to victory. And it was like, okay, this kid, he could play ball. And John Shire said that they were so comfortable starting 6 different guys this season, Foster included, and they needed it. With injuries to obviously Tyrese Proctor, and then he stayed in the starting lineup for that gelling and to have a continuous rotation. But yeah, it was a tough blow for him having that season end short. And the way I would describe his freshman season is, I mean, he had a freshman season. I mean, he was a rookie. Half his games were started, as we mentioned, and there's only one basketball, right? Which we've talked about for this upcoming Duke team, that there's only one basketball for guys to shoot. When you look at Caleb Foster, it was Tyrese Proctor needed shots. Jeremy Roach needed shots. Obviously, Kyle Filipowski, the All-American, needed shots. And then once Jared McCain found his rhythm, it was like, all right, either McCain or Filipowski should be shooting the basketball every time down the floor. So you look at the numbers, yes, 43% field goal percentage, almost 41% from three-point range. But the numbers, they're not high volume in those categories. 69 three-pointers attempted, just under 170 shots. So for Caleb Foster, I'm expecting to see a lot of those numbers on the screen there rise. 7.7 points per game. I would be stunned if he's not a double-digit scorer next year. It's going to be tough for him to try and keep a 40% three-point field goal percentage, but I expect that to be high because I think he is going to be the two guard. He's going to be that shooting guard that gets 30 to 35 minutes per game for Duke next season. So I have high aspirations for Caleb Foster, but I think this was a good learning season for him. Just would have liked to get him that postseason experience because when you look at the roster for next year, there's not a lot of postseason NCAA tournament experience on it.
Yeah, Kevin, to your point, when you look at Foster and we look at the volume, it's not where other guys on the team were and that sort of thing. But beyond that, when you think about Caleb Foster, the player, what you tended to see on the court with the basketball in his hands, how aggressive was he on the offensive end of the floor when you were to look at that? A ball handler that's known for scoring in his high school days. And I don't know, is that something possibly that, to your point, we see him be a little bit more aggressive next season? How did he fare in that regard as a freshman?
I thought it was good given who was in front of him because he was never going to be the main facilitator on offense when you had a healthy team out there with Jeremy Roach and Tyrese Proctor. Those were going to be the two guys that orchestrated the offense, definitely ahead of Caleb Foster. Now, we didn't see a ton of four-guard lineup with Proctor, Roach, Foster, McCain, with Filipowski in the middle. Would have liked to see that a little bit more. Obviously, the injuries that we just highlighted with Proctor and now Foster tended to that lineup just not being available consistently. But I think he is going to be the backup ball handler. Yes, he's going to start, but he's going to be that second guy behind Tyrese Proctor who runs the offense. And I think that's what we talked about. Duke's roster is complete. They're not going to add another ball handler. Sure, guys can handle the ball that are currently on the roster, but your two primary point guards are going to be Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster. So like we said with Tyrese Proctor and how he has to get better getting to the free throw line, I think the same thing goes for Caleb Foster. He shot just under 70%. Those numbers are going to have to rise going into next season, and he was only 33 of 48 at the free throw line. So he's going to have to attempt more free throws as well. So the big thing for this Duke basketball backcourt for next season is Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster have to do a better job at getting to the free throw line and making their free throws in the process.
Yeah, in summary, be more aggressive, take more attempts, and attack on the offensive end of the floor. These guys are really skilled. Fun to see them play this past season. Foster in particular, as a freshman, very heralded, like we've discussed, and getting to see him play for Duke. Hate that the season was cut short. So before our next break, like we did with Tyrese Proctor, let's talk about the defensive end of the floor. It's just as important. Foster's big for his size, big for his position, I should say. What did you think of his defense?
Yeah, I thought as a freshman, there was obviously some bumps and bruises along the way, but he progressively got better. As you mentioned, 6'5", which is kind of funny because he's on the smaller end of the Duke basketball roster for next season. But you look at a 6'5" guard and he can be an imposing figure. I think it's going to be interesting how John Shire matches him up next season. Maybe he is going to be the two, but maybe he's guarding point guards. Maybe he's guarding shooting guards because we mentioned how good Tyrese Proctor was defensively, and he's a little bit of a bigger player than him. It's also going to be interesting to see if he fills out a little bit. He'll have a full off season, knows what he's going into, getting into the weight room in Durham this summer, assuming he's fully healthy and gets cleared and he's ready to go. So expecting him to bulk up a little bit more, probably get a little bit bigger, get a little bit leaner. And I think that'll all help defensively as well.
All right, one more timeout here on the show today, and then when we come back, let's talk more. What does next season look like for Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster? What can we learn about them going into the new season when we come back? Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel, of course, is America's #1 sportsbook and our absolute favorites. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. We have seen a heck of a start to the conference finals in both sports, the Eastern and Western Conference finals. In basketball, of course, you've got the Pacers and Celtics going head-to-head in the East. Timberwolves and Mavericks in the West. On the hockey side of things right now, how about that series we're going to see between the Panthers and the Rangers? And then on the Western Conference side of things, the Oilers and the Stars going head-to-head. And FanDuel, of course, is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook and a proud sponsor of Locked On Blue Devils. Final few moments here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Kevin Connelly is the site expert for Ball Durham, and he joins me on the show today. Tell me a little bit about your work, Kevin. What is balldurham.com?
We got everything you could possibly want on Duke Athletics over there at Ball Durham. Duke baseball in the ACC tournament, gearing up for the NCAA tournament. Same thing with softball. They are already into the NCAA tournament and a weekend through. So super regionals coming up for them. And then obviously everything you could possibly want on Duke basketball. You talked about the NBA playoffs. We're going over rosters, recruiting, a lot of stuff even going on in the summer over with Duke basketball and at Ball Durham. So you can come give us a read every day over at balldurham.com. And then you can follow us on Twitter at ball_Durham.
Check it all out. It's great stuff. I can't recommend it enough. So go check out Kevin Connelly and the team at Ball Durham. I love reading it each and every day. All right. So Proctor and Foster coming back for another year. Before we get into kind of specifics about what it looks like on the floor next year, let's rehash the decision. How do you think both of these players got to their decision to ultimately come back and play another year from Duke rather than try the professional route or possibly enter the transfer portal? How do you think they got to those decisions?
Yeah, well, you know what? I don't want to say it's easy because it feels like nothing is easy in terms of returning in college basketball these days with the transfer portal. But I don't see another option that these guys had other than transferring. And I think Jon Scheyer made it a priority, wanting that retention of his backcourt, wanting that consistency and familiarity with the program and how things are run. So Tyrese Proctor, a captain from last season, returning. Obviously, you have the other captains in Ryan Young graduating and Jeremy Roach hopping into the transfer portal. So I think the versatility is there with Tyrese Proctor. Caleb Foster, same thing. I think you can also get an idea of what Jon Scheyer thinks is going to happen with his roster, with the way he recruits for the next season. And yes, Duke has a loaded recruiting class, but they don't have any point guards coming into campus this summer. So I think he was expecting to keep 2 guards from this roster out of the 4 of Roach, McCain, Proctor, and Foster. He keeps the 2 in Proctor and Foster. And I just don't see, I didn't see, yes, it is a weak draft. I didn't see really any professional routes for these guys to go. Tyrese Proctor wants to play in the NBA. I don't think he wants to try and begin his professional career, maybe back home in Australia. I think he wants to be an NBA player. And for Caleb Foster, he didn't really have an NBA prospectus after this past season, but certainly could if he has a quality sophomore year.
Yeah, really fired up to see what these guys can do going into next season. Proctor, a captain the year that just ended. I would expect both of these guys to be the front runners for that captain seat for this Duke basketball team. I'm sure you agree with me in that respect there, Kevin. How lofty of expectations should we put on these 2 players alone?
Oh, I think when you look at least in the conference, all ACC players, I would be surprised if that's not the case. And if it's not the case, I think Duke might be in trouble this season because the freshmen can only carry them so far. So you knock on wood, prevent injuries, and hope they get through the season healthy. Obviously, both coming off of seasons where they sustained injuries, but I think both should be all ACC players this year. I think if you're Duke, you're hoping Tyrese Proctor could be a first-team all ACCer. Caleb Foster, you hope he's on the second team. I think those are reasonable expectations to put on both these players going into next season.
Okay, so we talk about the freshmen and laying out kind of a blueprint for the 6-man freshman class. But then when you look at Duke and you look at, just really 2 guys that played minutes on last year's squad coming back, Duke has a fair share of transfers that are going to be joining the fold this season. What is that impact, do you think, for Proctor and Foster, specific to each of the guys coming in, how they could play together, all of those things? Like, what kind of impact could they have on this transfer class that's coming in for Duke?
I think it'll be good, especially with Sion James. I'm really interested to see him get on the court and play with this team. I don't think them returning will have much of an impact on the two bigs or wings, I should say, in Malik Brown and Mason Gillis. I think Malik Brown's going to do his thing down low, and he's going to be that enforcer and protector of Cooper Flagg, and he's going to get physical inside. And Mason Gillis, I see more as a 3-and-D type wing. I don't want to say he's like Jacob Grandison, but I can see minutes decreasing for him as the season goes along. That's just how I see it right now on paper in late May. And then when you look at the newest player that joined the fray in Cameron Sheffield, I just don't see a lot of playing time for him this upcoming season. He still has 2 years of eligibility left. So I don't see maybe Sion James is impacted most by playing with Proctor and Foster, but in terms of the other three guys, I don't see the biggest correlation between Proctor and Foster to the rest of the transfer class.
Other than, hey, these guys were here last year, and these transfers now will look to the likes of Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster to kind of show them a way, what it's like to be a part of the Brotherhood and play for Duke, have the target on your back, play inside Cameron Indoor Stadium. It's going to be so much fun. I'm really fired up that these two guys are coming back for another season. Overall, pretty pleased with the year that we had from both of these players in particular. So to wrap it all up, Kevin, just one more kind of final thought on the season reviews for Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster. How are you going to remember these guys and the impact that they had on the 2023-2024 Duke Blue Devils?
Well, like I said, with Proctor, I think you just have that bad taste in your mouth from the Elite Eight. I think for Caleb Foster, you also have a bad taste in your mouth that he didn't get to play in the postseason, and maybe he would have been the extra piece to get Duke over the hump and back to the Final Four. And then once you're in the Final Four, who knows what could have happened in perhaps the 2 games there. But I think the biggest thing is there's room to grow. There's room to grow for both players. Both are going to have a big role on next year's team. Both are going to be starters from day one. And I think that's really encouraging for John Shire. He can continue to coach these guys and continue to have them build into a leadership role for what could be a really special season for Duke next year.
Kevin, as always, the time is so greatly appreciated. And the good news for everybody here, you're coming back tomorrow, man. We've got a couple of more end-of-year reviews to discuss here this week. So thanks for the time, and we'll see you then, all right?
Thanks, JJ.
All right, that's Kevin Connelly, again, the site expert from Durham, joining us here on this episode of Locked on Blue Devils. That's going to do it for our show here today. Subscribe to us wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating and written review, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on X at LO_Blue Devils. As always, go Duke. I'll talk to you tomorrow. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.